All right, welcome everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started. I'm Will Cooper, and I'm here to talk to you about SharePoint automation with actions. We're going to start with some high-level stuff, some ground rules, and then we'll get into the main presentation. I am a SharePoint solutions developer, and I do a lot of things related to Microsoft 365 and SharePoint. I build all kinds of different SharePoint solutions. I worked with many different organizations across all kinds of different businesses over the last 12 years. And I do things also with YouTube. I have a YouTube channel called SharePoint Smart. I hope you check that out and subscribe. There's a lot of cool learning opportunities and videos that I put out there. Additionally, I run a product site called SharePoint Dashboards. And that's something I'll talk a little bit about at the very end of the presentation if you choose to stick around. Infowise is the organization that I'm with, providing the Ultimate Forms toolkit, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Our philosophy is to make things in SharePoint simple and easy, and also we're always looking to make improvements to our tool set. We've been around for a long time, and we're always looking for ways to have progress and make things even better, provide more options, and make things easier to use. This is a comprehensive solution toolkit that you can add to your SharePoint environment. It deploys entirely inside of your SharePoint interface, and they are tools that you can use without having to do any programming at all. No code. That runs across all of our different tools. I am recording the presentation. This will be made available on YouTube later today, so don't feel like you have to scramble to take notes. You can replay any of this or share with your colleagues. If you have questions during the presentation, I hope you'll please give those to me. You can do that by using the Q&A tool in our webinar. I may not get your question right away, but I promise you I will before the end of the presentation. Our tools are available both for Microsoft 365 and also for on-premise SharePoint. So regardless of which version of SharePoint you're using, you can take advantage of what I'm showing in the presentation. All right, so out of the box, SharePoint is a bit limited. It's missing key functionality that we'd like to have. And so what we're looking to do is expand our options so that we can build SharePoint solutions and be able to do that efficiently. Ultimate Forms brings a lot to the table in this regard. We're going to run through that today. I'm going to show you how Ultimate Forms handles automation through actions and how it can make that easy for you when building out SharePoint solutions. All right, so now we're going to get to the meat of the presentation, which is about workflow and actions, automation as it relates to SharePoint. And what we want to think about before we get into SharePoint are some key concepts. Regardless of which tools you're using to do automation, these principles will hold true. So make sure that you consider this as you think about what's going to make sense for your organization. The interface for setting up workflow is essential. Side by side, you can see a demonstration of something you might find working in a Power Automate workflow. And as you can tell in this example, in many cases, there's coding involved. You need to use code snippets and do some programming related tasks in order to be able to set up automation in Power Automate. Generally, it's developer oriented. Ultimate Forms has an easy interface where there is no coding. You use drop-down menus and checkboxes and settings like that. So it has an easy user interface, and that's important. Do not have to be a developer in order to take advantage. Our automation tools are embedded directly into your SharePoint by way of an app. This shows up directly in your SharePoint interface. You don't have to open up a separate application to do automation. You can just do it right from within SharePoint. So having something tightly integrated into your SharePoint interface is very important. We certainly need to have a centralized dashboard where we can see all of the automation as it relates to a form that we're working on. So the dashboard is a key part of your solution. And then, of course, we need to be able to automate a very wide variety of activities. Particularly, we want that focused on SharePoint. Naturally, if we're doing a SharePoint form, then we also want to be able to do automation related to various activities that we do in SharePoint. And there could be a lot of different things we can do. What you can see in this example are some of the things that are in Infowise, which you're going to get more into further on. Trigger conditions are a critical concept in workflow, and that should be easy to understand and easy to use. The trigger condition is the condition upon which that workflow is going to run, and we need to be able to set that easily. So some typical examples would be, when a support ticket comes in, that's a new item added, or an update to a SharePoint record. Other examples would include timer based, if you want to do like schedule workflow. The trigger conditions need to be easy. Another aspect is the organization of that automation. So what we want is to break it into small pieces, because automation can get complicated and it can be hard to understand. What we would like to avoid is a situation where we have one giant complicated workflow where we have to sort of dive down through all the layers, and that turns into a bit of a headache that's hard to understand. Instead, we want to break it into smaller pieces. Print automation is essential. Out-of-the-box SharePoint does not include any print capabilities. It is possible through a convoluted process to do some print-related things through Microsoft Word and Power Automate, but it's very difficult. Alternatively, you have a very easy path with the tools I'm going to show you as it relates to automating print output. For example, if you want to get a PDF output from a SharePoint form. Email automation is essential, and as a matter of fact, this is something that's getting a lot of conversation right now because Microsoft just deprecated a commonly used feature in the SharePoint interface, which allows users to create email alerts. They've removed that and limited what's capable by your users. As I've already pointed out, it's not reasonable to think that your regular SharePoint users are going to create email notifications by way of Power Automate. So we need some way to be able to automatically trigger emails to go out to notify when there are new requests or updates that need to be taken care of. We really want a comprehensive tool as it relates to SharePoint activities and something focused on SharePoint. Because if that's the platform I'm working in, what I'm looking to do is replace and remove those manual steps. So if I'm in SharePoint, the automation focus is SharePoint, and we need something comprehensive that handles all of those activities I would have to otherwise do manually in SharePoint. And probably more important than many of the other things I showed is no coding, no programming. For those of you guys who have done some workflow in Power Automate, you've probably run into this. It can get very difficult trying to work out how to do the programming related to that, and that can lose time, cause headaches, or even provide a wall where you can't overcome that challenge. So avoiding programming in our workflow is certainly going to make a big difference if we can have a system that allows us to not have to do that. All right, let's jump into SharePoint. So what we're going to do here is we're going to think about all this different automation. I'm going to show you examples. I'm here in SharePoint Online, and everything I show in the presentation today, you'll be able to take a look at later. You can download the solution. And just to keep things interesting as part of this, I'm going to challenge you guys. I'm going to give you a few trivia questions I'll post in the Q&A. You can just kind of try to figure this out for yourself or consider the question and even respond in the Q&A if you want to. But I'm going to post my first question to you right now in our Q&A section, and just give you something to think about as I'm presenting the other things. If I could get this thing in here, just trying to work through an interface. Okay, I just posted my question to you. All right, so you can just think about that. If you want to respond in the Q&A, you can. All right, so here I am in a SharePoint list, and what I've got is a request form. So this would be for support requests. We'll take a look at the general structure of that real quick so that it'll make sense these various actions that I'm getting ready to show you. So user comes in, they fill in their name. I've got a status for the request. They describe what they need. It gets assigned to somebody. Just kind of a general form for capturing requests. It's just something to help illustrate our different actions that I'm going to run through. Now, I want to show how the workflow is set up in our system. The way that you can get to that is just to click to this design option. Once you've installed our software, which you can do for free, you can install a trial of our software for free. You just click on the command bar design. That takes you to our main settings page. And our focus today is going to be on actions. That's our automation piece. And you can see these are the various actions I've created on my list. We're going to see those executed through the user interface. This is how you set up and run automation through our toolkit, through these actions. You click on Add New Action, and you can see all those different options that I was highlighting in my slide deck just a moment ago. All right, so let's take it from a user perspective first of all. Whoops, I clicked on the wrong button. I'm going to manually execute some of these actions. You can trigger them different ways. Manual execution is one of those options. So I can have this user triggered, and we'll just do the first one, which is update status. I've got a drop down. I'm just going to pick a new status, and I'm going to change it to hold. And then once I do that, it's going to change the status of my first item. You can see that it's now a hold status. So pretty simple concept, and that's just set up through this interface. So I'll just show you how I created that, and I'll help show you how our automation works. There's 4 tabs. When you go to create an item, first you're going to select what type of action that you're doing. This is for update list item. I just gave it a name, and I selected manual execution. I can choose which icon I want to show there. I want the user to input a new status, so I added this input parameter. They just select from that drop down, and then the only other thing that I really need to do in this case is go to the action tab, and I say update status to that new status, and that's it. That's all I had to do. Really simple to set up. You can see these numbers in the order column here. This is the sequence that the actions are evaluated in. So sometimes that order can matter. I can easily move that up or down if I want to by changing that value. In this case, it's just running independently. So that was a really simple one. Let's go ahead and move on. We'll do create request. And this is just speeding up the process. So rather than clicking new and filling out the whole form, maybe I need to do something very quickly. Let's see. Check on slow computer speed. There we go. Hit submit. And it's just running that automation. Just that simple. So if I refresh this page, I'm going to see my new request. It's going to show up on top. There it is. Check on slow computer speed. All right. And then let's go ahead and take a look at the setup for that one. Again, I got that set up to manual execution. In this case, I had a couple of input fields. I had a text field and a long description for the user to fill out. And then the actual meat of the workflow is always on the action tab. I just needed to set a few fields. I had it set automatically to whoever the current user is. And then I just took those 2 inputs from the user and set that to the request and description fields. That's it. Those are the only settings that I had to do. So this is really different than if I'm working in this workflow with all these different blocks and everything. It's broken into small, easy to understand pieces. And notice there's no programming there. Didn't have to do any nested braces or evaluations or anything. It's just a very easy setup. All right, let's take a look at some of the other actions. We'll just keep proceeding down our list. Delete request, that one's pretty obvious. I'm going to skip that. I'll just get rid of it. Copy, that's an option that's not part of our default interface, but I'm sure you guys would agree that that can be beneficial if I want to have a copy of something real quickly rather than having to manually do it. So let's just take a look at that real quick. That's just copying my existing list item, when I refresh, you're going to see it in there. There you go. Let's check on computer speed. Copy. It just appended that word in there. And we'll take a peek at that real quick. This UI is easy to understand. It shows us what type of automation each action is, and then shows us some columns to help us know that it's working correctly. Just very simple, intuitive interface, easy to understand. In this case, I'm using this copy function. It does allow me the ability to override fields. Obviously, they can't be totally identical, or I don't want them to be at least. So in this case, what I did is just took the value in the request field and literally appended space dash space copy on there. Much the way you would if you're just copying a file on your computer, it would do the same type of thing. Everything we've shown so far is very simple. All right, let me discuss my question I posted. I asked, what does it mean for a workflow action to be synchronous versus asynchronous? Synchronous means it's happening at the same time. Asynchronous, the opposite. In workflow, normally in SharePoint, you always have asynchronous workflow. It means that workflow is running after the fact. And in some cases, it's a delay of up to 1.5 to 2 minutes. We do provide, as a part of our settings, the ability to have synchronous workflow. That's something unique to our toolkit. I can do that on the second tab here. There's a synchronous setting, and it opens up some possibilities. As an example, I can make an email go out immediately instead of having to wait on a delay. All right, I'm going to post another question for you guys to think about in the Q&A, and I'll continue with my presentation after I post that. Whoops. All right, I'm doing that now. Try to come up with some curveballs for you guys. I want to challenge you a little bit. All right, let's go back to our interface and let's go to our next action. All right, this is something that's comes up a lot for me. In SharePoint, we have the attachments functionality on list items, and attachments to those forms is important. But the way that SharePoint handles that isn't necessarily too great. It's a lot better for us if those files get to a SharePoint library, and we can automate that through the actions. In my case, I've got a support ticket here where I have attached some files, and I can see that based on that paperclip. In my form, I'll show you. I've attached a couple of files. Got a couple of screenshots. You can see that at the bottom and the drag and drop interface. And I'm just going to run this action. It's going to just move those files over to a SharePoint document library for me. So I just check that, run actions, copy attachments to library. Notice the UI giving us results on this. This is something normally I wouldn't have if, for example, I was doing something with Power Automate. I don't see those real-time updates to help me know when the workflow is executed. So that real-time interface is real handy. If I go over to the documents library, you can see what it did. It made a folder for me, and it went ahead and automatically moved those files over. Really handy. All right, let's go on to the next one. Go to Run Actions. I'm just working my way down through the list. Send email reminder. That'd be a real common scenario. So we'll talk about emails a little bit. Now this would be maybe just to give somebody a nudge. Oh, I didn't have a sign requester in that one. Here, let me do a different one. Oh, so, okay, I've set up something wrong in the automation. Okay, apologies for that. Let me show you how that's set up. So the send email reminder, it just takes information that's from the ticket. So we need the requester. It's going to go out to that. I was just missing the from field. I can just use my own email for that. This toolkit does include a comprehensive email alert system, which is really handy. If that's something your organization is wrestling with, you can go to that. So that's additional to the actions. It has its own separate interface under the alerts. And much like the actions, you can define those trigger conditions, which define when those emails should go out. You can dynamically define your recipients. And then you've got a rich text editor to be able to format that email content. So if you are an organization that's trying to figure out what to do to handle this functionality that Microsoft has removed from SharePoint, and your users are frustrated that they can no longer create email notifications the way that they did, this solution will help automate that. And the good news is creating those email notifications is very intuitive. You don't have to create those for them. You can add this functionality and your SharePoint community can just define their own roles at any time when they want to. All right, let's go on to the next one. Now, I mentioned it's important to be able to do automation of any of your activities in SharePoint. So when you consider that we want to be focused on SharePoint, that could include things like creating new lists and sites as well. And that could have many screens. So if I can automate that process, think about maybe you have a standard process or template that you would like to use to provision new SharePoint sites. This automation can be very handy in that regard. All right, so I'll make a new list called bananas. And just as you might expect, it'll create a new list in the site contents. I'll let it do that. I'll do something closely related. I'm actually going to create a new subsite under this site. And I wanted to do it in a very simple manner. So we'll just do cherries. I always like to use food for my examples. This is actually spinning up a new subsite. I'm going to show that it did that in just a moment. I'll go to the site contents and show that they're there. The good thing is you can control all the settings on this easily. So in the action, I have many different options on the configuration. So what I'm doing is removing some of that for the user to just pick all those options for them ahead of time. So when I go to site contents, now you can see the new list that I just created. Additional to that, you can see I've got a new subsite, a new team subsite there called Cherries. I'm not going to open that up just in the interest of time. You can see how that would be. Now everything I'm showing, I'm manually triggering it for the sake of our presentation. But as with any type of SharePoint automation, it could be whatever trigger conditions you want. So for example, I may have these activities happening automatically anytime a new request is created, for example. So we're just wanting to take a look at all of these different possibilities. All right, let me jump to the answer to the question I posed. I said, should a workflow action be able to trigger itself? Yes, there are situations where you'd want to do that. What I'm hinting at there is you could get into a problem where you might have a recursive workflow. As an example, if I trigger automation that should happen anytime a record is updated, it could be that inside of that I trigger an update of that same record. So in other words, it would re-trigger the workflow because I'm doing an action. So that's something to watch out for. Generally, you handle this by putting conditions into that automation to make sure that it doesn't keep calling itself. So yes, you would want to be able to do that in many situations. I'll go ahead and post another question for you guys. There you go. All right, let's jump back to the different types of automation. Coming down towards the end of it. Okay, add permissions for assigned to. Now, this would be item level permission. So generally that's pretty difficult to set up. In my case, I'd like to make it where this item is available to the person who's working on the ticket. And I could do that dynamically. We do have automation for handling item level permissions. So we're doing that. The next one after that is print automation. I mentioned that SharePoint does not provide any utility to produce PDFs for you. I don't have the assigned to person in that ticket. That's all right. The email PDF is going to create automatically a PDF of the form and email that out to me. I'll show you what that would look like. This is just an example. You can format this however you want, but it would basically email out that form as a PDF automatically, which is what it just did. Also in here we have tasks. Maybe I want to assign tasks related to the completion of that ticket. Set up review meeting with customer. It gives me updates as it's working on that. Then the last one was to be able to send meeting invites. So maybe I want to send out a meeting invite for later in that day to review that item. I can also do that through the interface. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll just pick a time, let's say 3 o'clock in the afternoon, run that to 4 o'clock. Just using the drop-down picker. I'll do that for today. And that actually adds directly to my calendar in Outlook. So just a really good wide variety of different types of tasks that you can do. So we took a look at the build interface. Basically, that adapts based on what type of action you're doing. So if I'm in this interface and I go to actions, when I add new action, of course, there's a whole variety of different types. And depending on which one I pick, it's going to ask for different inputs for that. So let's look at the subsite one, for example. You basically work your way from left to right across the tabs. The Advanced tab allows you to turn on some options such as history logging, which is important. And then you go into the action, which actually gives the information that you need for this. If you're going to create a new SharePoint site, it really just follows the same thing that you would see in the user interface. We're just automating it instead. So if I was going to make a new SharePoint site, I need to know what type of site I'm creating. It's got a language specification, the regional locale for that site, and then I'm indicating the site name. But all of the options that I would have to otherwise do manually, I can define that all in the workflow. And then the conditions really have to do with the trigger conditions. And I can do things like check. Maybe I want to send an update only when status is updated to complete, as an example. So I could do status equals complete. And I can just type that out. So I can say it like that. So instead of having to type out these codes and things like that, you can really just handle things from drop-downs, which just show all your fields in the form. So that's really a great thing, having this very simple and easy to understand interface, not having to deal with a long, convoluted workflow. One thing I mentioned is the print templates. Those are easy to set up. There's another part of our interface which allows you to do that. You can go in here and define all your different settings for the print template. In my case, I just used a simple print template mode. I just picked some fields from the form and those shown there. I can do customization for the header and footer, and I have typical kinds of print settings I can do. And the key thing is I can do that all from within SharePoint, so that's very handy. All right, let me bounce back to my question. If the workflow didn't run as expected, you can check your actions history. In our interface, we do provide a way to do that. If I go through here, I can go through here and click on an actions history list and check to see which updates have run. So that would allow you to see if there's an error message or if there's a problem with the execution, or if you just want to confirm that the execution was okay. So whenever you're checking on workflow, you want to be able to look at those previous executions of the workflow. All right, I got one more question for you, which I'll post. This is my last one for you guys to think about as we get towards the end of our presentation. There you go. Now, workflow runs hand in hand with the forms. So whenever you're going to do a SharePoint solution, you need two things, which I would say are equally important. It's a marriage, if you will. You have your custom form in SharePoint, and then you have the automation that goes with it. The good thing in our situation is we're providing you both, that it's a comprehensive solution toolkit. This allows you to drag and drop fields into this Canvas interface, and you can do custom forms. This otherwise is not at all available inside of SharePoint. Inside SharePoint, there is no custom form builder. You just have a vertical list of fields. You can say whether or not fields are required, but it's quite limited. This really runs on the opposite end of the spectrum. You can entirely control the interface, do multi-column layouts, and set up dynamic roles to customize the functionality. And I can even control actions from here. If you'll notice, in my form, I set up a button that I want to run some of my automation. I set this to trigger one of my actions to send the email reminder, and I can do that just by going into one of these records. So that's included as a part of this if you work with our tools. So rather than go through the list view, I can actually go into a ticket and say send an email reminder, and then I'll go out to whoever originated that ticket. So being able to use both is really valuable and important. All right, let me go ahead and address my last question that I posed in the Q&A. And that was about whether or not you should use one workflow toolkit for automation or whether you should combine those. And you could think of this as your tool bench at home. If you go in your garage, you've got all your tools. And what I could say is having more tools available is better. And the answer is having more than one toolkit is better for you. And the reason is you have more options. There are things that you can do in Power Automate, which are specific to Power Automate, and it has an array of options. But as with any toolkit, it's limited. There are things you cannot do. I mentioned printing as being something that's extraordinarily difficult to do through that toolkit. Likewise, Power or Actions and Ultimate Forms, we can do a lot of things that are not available in Power Automate. So being able to use both, even from the context of one list, is very much to your advantage. You'll have much better versatility. You'll be able to build more comprehensive solutions and have more options available when you have business requirements. So having more than one is definitely going to be a lot better for you. Now, I haven't seen any questions posted in the Q&A. I'll double check in case I missed anything, but this would be a great time. If you guys have any questions about how automation works with Ultimate Forms, how to set things up, you might think about different automation that you need to do. I'd be very happy to answer those questions at this time. And while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about how you can access Ultimate Forms. The first best thing you can do is to download our free trial of our software. It is our complete software. It'll set up a 30-day trial for you. If you go to infowisesolutions.com, you will just click on the Try Now for Free button. SharePoint Administrator does need to set up your software for you. That will allow you to try everything that I'm doing in my presentation. I will have this available later today for you to try out. It's easy to access. You can just go to our solution catalog that shows on the top menu in the settings screen. Click on webinars, and you're going to see as the very first tile the solution that I was showing today. You can download any of these. It's all included in our software. Also in our site, we've got lots of great resources to help you get started. I recommend take a look at the Kickstart training. That's a free training that'll walk you through building your very first forms and actions. So please do take a look at that. You can either follow through the written instructions and screenshots, or alternatively, you can watch the YouTube video to go through that. And then also we have many tutorials on our site to walk you through different things you might want to do. So you can try all of these things for free before making any kind of decision whether you might want to subscribe to our product. So lots of very good options for you. Another thing I'd like to highlight, if you want to talk to us, we're happy to do it. In this format, we can't have everybody talking all at once, obviously, but we would very much like to talk to you. And if you'd like to set up a call so that we can meet with you and have a discussion so that you can ask further questions about automation with our tools or custom forms or any of our functionality, we'd be very happy to talk to you. So you can just do that from our homepage. You can just click book a demo, enter your contact information, and we'll get that. We'll set up a web meeting and we'll talk to you one-on-one. Another thing I wanted to highlight to you before we wrap up today, I mentioned to you I have another tool called SharePoint Dashboards. This is a separate tool from Infowise Ultimate Forms, but it's something you may like. This allows you to do visualized interfaces if you want to have KPI indicators, charting, custom buttons, that type of thing. You can get in here. This also has a free trial that allows access to 21 free templates. And there are many, many different things you can do. You can browse through, and there is a video provided for each of these different templates. As of today, there are, I believe, 217 different templates in this site. So that's another thing that you could try for free in addition to Ultimate Forms. And that is our main information I want to show today. Let me see. I believe we've got a question. That was a little outside the scope. I got a question from Ronald. I think this may be a customer. It has to do with the database connection, and that is something that we're able to do through our software. You can do import from a SQL database using our tools. You can set up an import profile in our software to do that. Ronald, the best thing to do would be to just go ahead and send an email to our support, and we'll try to help you out, but can't address that on our webinar. Any other questions about how our actions and automation work? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording. I'm going to keep the session open in case people do have questions. We'll stay on for a few more minutes.